Jason Ganz. I am an analyst at GoCanvas, and I am here today to talk to you about a time in an analyst's career that happened to me, and I have talking to a lot of other analysts, has happened to them as well, and it can be a really interesting and frustrating time and how to get through it. So when you first start working as an analyst, it's really exhilarating. It feels like there's always something new to learn, whether on the business side, a new department to work with, a new project to dive into, or on the technical side, a new SQL trick or a new data source. And even when there's a lot, it can feel exhilarating because it feels like there's so much to learn, and if you just keep powering through it, then you'll be able to get the hang of everything. And then most of the time you do, and once you start to really get the hang of your data systems and writing SQL, it feels great to get into that rhythm early in your career. But then often something happens. The reports and requests start piling up. Your queries are running slowly. Someone comes to you and asks you to rerun an analysis you did 6 months ago, and you can't figure out how on earth you even got those numbers in the first place. You found yourself in the reporting treadmill. The reporting treadmill is what happens in the career of an analyst when more inputs, more SQL code, more reports and dashboards, more meetings with business users doesn't necessarily equal more output, either for the business with impact across the company or through your own personal skill growth. This can be a really frustrating time in the career of an analyst because you know that there's more you should be doing, more you should be learning, but it feels like the harder you try, you just can't make any progress. And luckily, you can get through it. And through a lot of trial and error and through a lot of mentorship from people, some of whom are in this room, we managed to break through this plateau and get to the next level of analytics at GoCanvas. And I'd like to talk to you about some of the strategies we use to do that, and hopefully you might find them useful within your own organization. The first is world-class SQL. Second is professional data modeling workflow. And the third is building a data-driven company culture. Let's take a quick look at each of these. World-class SQL. If you've reached the point in your career where the reporting treadmill is a concern, then you have the basics of SQL down. You know how to do your group bys, your where clauses, and your joins. But you probably also know that there's a whole other layer of SQL functions that are more advanced, but you might not feel comfortable integrating them into your workflow quite yet. Well, now is the time to do it. And the good news is, when you seek these out and learn to integrate them, you can do this all by yourself, and you can start changing the way that you code and your impact within the organization immediately. And you can make an impact pretty quickly. In fact, in just a sec, I'm going to tell you about one change that you can make to your SQL code that will make it more readable and more reusable that can be learned in 15 minutes or less. I know that that sounds super clickbaity, but hear me out. The second is building a professional data modeling workflow. This is making sure that your ETL is running smoothly, that your data quality is up to snuff, and that your information is laid out in a logical manner. You can't do this by yourself. You really need your whole data team on board to do this, and it takes more time, but you can still make progress in a relatively short time frame as long as you get the whole team on board. In talking to people, I tend to hear them say 1 to 3 months of concerted effort is how you can really start getting your data management in line. And the third is building a data-driven company culture. Now, I wish I could say that there were easy shortcuts to building a data-driven company culture like there are for the other two. But the fact of the matter is, building a data-driven company culture is really hard work. It takes a lot of time, and it requires you interfacing with pretty much everyone in the organization. But the good news is if you learn how to do this, if you learn how to go beyond writing great SQL and having a professional data modeling workflow, but really learning how to build a data-driven company culture, you join a rare class of analysts who can make a huge impact at any organization in which they join. Now, this talk is way too short to even fully dive into any one of these, but I want to give a quick tips on each of them, just some strategies that we've tried that have worked for us, and hopefully that they can help you spark some ideas and lead to new initiatives within your company. And of course, if you have more questions, feel free to reach out to me afterwards. World-class SQL. The first thing I recommend to anyone that's trying to improve their SQL writing is to forever switch from using subqueries to using CTEs. CTEs, or common table expressions, are a lot like subqueries, except instead of defining them in the middle of the query, you define them at the beginning. This may sound like a small change, but actually this subtle shift makes your code way easier to read. As you will learn, whenever you go back to an old script that you wrote using subqueries and you're trying to figure out what a 3 levels deep nested subquery does and how it changes the overall result of the query. I like to think of the difference between using CTEs and using subqueries as the difference between having a really messy room and having a clean room. When you have a really messy room, like when you're writing with subqueries, you probably think you know where everything is, and most of the time it works just fine. But if you leave for 6 months and come back, you're not going to be able to find anything. And God forbid you have to tell anyone else where to find something, and you're embarrassed to even let them see what you've done. With CTEs, like having a clean room, even if you don't know exactly where everything is, you can normally kind of logically deduce it. And I have 2 favorite things about CTEs. The first is that unlike subqueries, you can directly query them at the end of your script. What that means is you always know exactly what data are in the CTEs, and this helps cut down on a lot of errors. The second is that they're incredibly easy to learn. All you have to do, as you can see here, is switch from defining them like a subquery in the middle of the query at the top. I highly recommend you try this out, and especially on longer SQL scripts. And the first time you go back to a script that's written with a CTE instead of a subquery, you'll start to understand why this is such a powerful shift. The next thing I want to talk about is window functions. Window functions are an incredibly nifty set of SQL functions that allow you to perform data transformations on top of the data that you're pulling. Think of it like doing a looker table calculation or an Excel calculation, but all within SQL. Now, there's 3 things you need to know about window functions. The first is that they're incredibly useful. The second is they look really scary if you've never used them, but they're actually really easy. And the third is that they're pretty abstract. There's a really wide variety of situations where you could use window functions, so it can be hard to know where to get started, which is why I like to go back to that idea that anytime you would use a looker table calculation, you instead try out a window function. Some of the things that we use window functions for at GoCanvas are running totals, trailing 30 and 7-day averages, and my favorite is the lead and lag function, which allows you to pull rows up from earlier or later in your SQL query and pull them into that row, which is useful for a really wide variety of different use cases. All right, next up, professional data modeling. If you've reached the part of your career where being on the reporting treadmill is a concern, then you probably know your data really well. And you've probably started to recognize that there are some fields that get used way more than others, and that there tends to be a logical grouping of them. You probably know exactly how to string them together into a single query, but you find yourself writing the same SQL again and again. Even though Looker abstracts away a lot of this, there's still times when you're going to have to write the SQL. The way to get around this and make it easier to use your data is to create fact tables. For us, our most used facts table is our company facts table. And just to get a sense of the complexity that it reduces, up there is a picture of our data model. And all that stuff back there on the left-hand side are all the tables that go into feeding that purple table, which is our company facts table. This is really useful for example, when you have a new hire, they can learn to query 4 facts tables instead of 70 other tables. And it can also help improve performance. If you store your facts tables as tables instead of views, it reduces joins at runtime and can help speed up your queries. Now, you might be thinking, facts tables sound great, but what's the best way to build them? So one way to build facts tables would be to use looker-derived tables, and looker PDT is a great function. But about a year ago, we decided that we wanted a tool that was specifically built around managing the transformations of your data. And we started to use Data Build Tool, or DBT. DBT is an incredible tool that allows you to manage your data workflows so that you can schedule the building of all of your data models sequentially. And this is really useful when you have a lot of derived tables and views that are stacked on top of each other, because if something breaks down along the way, it tells you exactly what's breaking down, and you can also schedule and test to make sure that your models are being built the way that you expect them to. I like to think of the difference between DBT and using looker PDTs, persistent derived tables, as the difference between building something out of linking logs versus Legos. If you build something out of linking logs, you can build up a structure, but it's kind of loosely connected. So if you just nudge it, then you might run into problems. Whereas building it out of Legos, or like or like DBT, when it's more tightly joined, you're able to create something that is really tightly connected, and you can use it to go from building things like this to things like this. All right, finally, building a data-driven company culture. The first thing you need to do is learn to prioritize your time between data quality, ad hoc reporting, and strategic initiatives. This is really tough because you can't slack on any of these. If you don't make sure that your data quality is good, then your numbers will be wrong, and basically everything else you do is a waste of time. If you don't follow through on your ad hoc requests, then they start to pile up and people start to yell at you all the time on Slack. And if you don't focus on strategic initiatives, the year goes by and you realize that you didn't make any fundamental changes to how you operate. This is something that still we haven't mastered, but there are some shifts that we've made that have been really helpful. And the way that we've done that is by monitoring our data quality, managing our ad hoc requests, and protecting our time for strategic initiatives. Monitoring our data quality just meant setting up a series of looker data quality reports and DBT tests to make sure that our data was performing, and ETL was performing as expected. Managing ad hoc requests led to us creating a new input mechanism, an ad hoc Slack request channel for ad hoc requests. And anyone in the company, from the newest hire to the CMO, knows that if they Slack me or someone on our team with a data request, we're going to say, yeah, that sounds awesome, let's do it. Can you post in #analytics ad hoc channel? Doing this helps us manage our requests and creates a single place so that we can all work off of it and chip them away so that it doesn't take up too much time. And then there's protecting your time for strategic initiatives. This can be really tough, so one thing that we started doing is having time every Friday set aside for pair programming on larger, more strategic tasks. This is great because even in the most hectic week, we know that we're going to have some time set aside for us to work on the long-term things that really excite us. Hopefully we get more than that, but just knowing that we get to make some progress on this every week has been really great for the team. Now, the last thing that I'm going to leave you with is that to really be a great analyst and to spread the information across your company, you need to educate everyone you work with. The first is your team. And the way you work with your team is you need to mentor them on your data model so that they know the ins and outs of the data. This is particularly important if you are hiring new people who might not know some of the historical trends that are associated with why your data is laid out the way it is, or what happened in the past to get your business to where it was. And so working and mentoring with these people to get them up to speed is critical to success. The second is your end users. And you need to collaborate with them. So on one hand, you need to be educating them about the reports and dashboards that you're building for them, what they mean, and how to use them. But just as important is learning from them, what they do in their jobs that requires data, and how you can make sure that your reports are actually benefiting them and doing things that help them do their job better. And lastly, you need to educate your executives. And the way you do this is you contextualize the data for them. They don't care about a 2% drop in some random metrics for a week. They want to know about the long-term trends that are affecting their business, how you and your team are going to help the company hit their goals and continue to thrive for years to come.